All right, so now we're going to talk about hooks. So with React 16.8, which is the latest version so far, maybe you're watching this in the future, so maybe it's going to be a greater version, but you're still going to get access to hooks. We get again hooks. So with class components, we can get access to state and life cycles and re-rendering and all of that. We know that. So for ages before 16.8, we had no access to add state to functional or stateless components. But now hooks, we can add the state with hooks and make it not the stateless component anymore, only if we want to. So now the way we use them is very different than using a class. It's very, very different. Same idea, but different, of course. So we get a bunch of hooks. So if you go to the docs, right here, you get the link to the reference to the docs. And at the bottom, you see hooks API reference. So if you go here, you're going to get all these hooks. So we're going to start with the most basic ones, and then we're going to talk about the other ones. So we're going to start with useState and then useEffect. These are, the most common ones. And then we're going to do useContex, and we're going to talk about some of the additional hooks. All right. Now, once you get this ones, the other one are, pretty much the same. Okay. So first we're going to start with useState. That's the most basic one. Now, of course, we're going to need a project. I've installed a new project right here on my directory. It's going to be called React_hooks. And I've deleted everything on the source. Just left the index.js, which is the reference to the app. And on the app, we have the default class component, which I'm going to convert to a functional component. But I'm going to do it on the next section. So let's go to the next section and start with useState. Okay, so the first one, it's the most basic one, which is the useState. And this is the one that you're going to be using pretty much the whole time. Now, everything is on the docs, and I'm not going to do anything crazy right here. If you go to the hooks API reference and you click on useState, you're going to get, of course, some documentation about this, and then you get an example. So we're going to learn with this same example. But of course, I'm going to go slow, and I'm going to tell you, how this works. Because if you check the docs, the docs, it's pretty bad. Maybe I'm gonna just show you some of the, some references we get right here, and just tell you why are they just providing us with such a, bad reference. But that's okay. I'm gonna tell you how to use it. You're gonna learn it first. Okay, so right here in this example, we're gonna get something simple. We get a count, and then we get a number, right? Which comes from this state. And then if we click on the reset is going to reset the count. If we click on the plus, we're going to add 1. And if we do minus, we're going to, rest 1. Pretty simple. So if we think about this, we could do this with state, right? Really simple. With state, we can do it just like that. All right. The first, of course, I'm going to change this because we are not going to use this anymore. So I'm going to delete this. And for now, I'm just going to leave React, right? Just going to create a functional component. So I'm going to say const. And then we're going to do app. App. And this one is going to be equal to just a functional component. Of course, we still need to return some JSX. So I'm going to bring fragments. All right. And I'm going to do an h3, maybe with that count. Pretty much the same example, h3. And first, I'm going to just hard code everything. I'm going to say count equal to 0. All right. Okay. We get our functional component. Now, if we were working with the class-based component, we know that we can go at the top and say state, equals to something and something like that. Of course, this will not work right here because this is a functional component. We will have to do something like const state equal then to the object, and inside we do a count of, something, 0, let's say. So something like that would, work. But again, this is just a variable. It's just a fake state. Okay, so first, before we can use a state, we need to bring it at the top, just like we would do with components. So I'm going to go right here and say that I want to use state. Use state. All right, that's the first step. Now I'm going to go at the bottom, and I'm going to add a button, just like we get on the examples. So I'm going to open and close, and I'm going to say add 1, and I'm going to do a plus. Now, what's going to happen is that when we click on this button, we're going to, of course, add 1. So if we were working with a functional class-based component, we will do onClick equal open and close, and then we just trigger a function that says this.setState, of course, set state. And notice that I'm not even getting the reference to set state right here. Notice that. So we do this dot set state, and of course we modify whatever we want to modify. This will not work just like this. For now, I'm just gonna leave this empty. All right, gonna save it. So whenever we want to use a state on a functional component, we need to use this, and this is just a method. So if I copy, I'm gonna delete this state. Now we're gonna use useState, and again, this is a method. So if I just save it like this, nothing is gonna work. Let me just open the project, npm start. So if we use it like this, this is not gonna work. Like, remember, this is a functional component. It does not work that way. All right, so let me just bring the app. Okay, so it says app is not defined. All right, okay, so we export default app. So I'm gonna go to index, and I need to import the app. Sorry for that. So import app from, and then that / and then app. All right, let's see what we get. Okay, so again, we get this, the empty on click, but that's okay. So I'm gonna go at the bottom, and I'm gonna say, okay, so on this component, of this functional component, I want to use a state. All right, if you remember, whenever you declare an state on a class-based component, you need to have kind of a initial state, right? You can add them later, but you will need an initial state most of the times, which is an empty string, or maybe a boolean, or a number, or null, or an object, or whatever. So with useState, we need an initial state. So the first argument we can put right here is the initial state of our application, which is going to be 0. Now again, this is a functional component. We just cannot toss this there. What we will need to do is to put it on a variable. Now, the name of the variable needs to make sense in what you want to do. If you're going to work with counts, then the variable, of course, call counts. All right, so now we have a variable that it's using this method, and then we have a default value. All right, so I'm going to delete the onClick for now, and I'm going to add this in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to go back to the application, and we get count and add 1. Of course, nothing works. All right, now what do we get? What do we get on this count? Let me just go right here and say console log, and I'm gonna console log what we get on the count with this useState. It's gonna look funny, I gotta tell you that. So I'm gonna inspect, I'm gonna go to the console, and we get an array. So what this is returning, it's an array. If I open the array, we get just 2 values. The first one, the one in the first position, is of course the initial state, and the second one, it's a function. So remember that when with a class component, we do this that set state to update the state. Well, when we instart a useState, they give us this function, which is the one that is going to be updating the state. So later we're going to use the function to trigger a change of state. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how to do it. It's pretty simple. Okay, now when you create an instance of this, you do have access to the default state. Remember that this is just an array. So right from the start, you could do something like count, and then I want to access the first position on the array. So if we get 0, we get 0. If the initial state is, I don't know, 10, we get 10. All right, so that works. So we know that if we want to update this state, we need to trigger this function. Now I'm gonna put it right here the way you're gonna find it on the docs and everywhere else. So what we are using right here, you can see the example, it's some ESX. It's not React, it's just ESX. Since we are getting an array with this one, what we do, we create this variable with an array, and what we do, we pass the name of the variables. So the first one, we know that the first position is the default state, or the actual state. So I'm gonna name it count, just like, the variable. And then on the second position, we get the function. So I'm gonna do comma, and by convention, it's set and whatever is that you're working. In this case, we are working with count. So this is going to be the function inside useState. Now, why are we doing something like this? Well, the thing is that right now you can make a reference to count, and this will still work because right now we are just changing it with ESX. This is a direct reference to the first position on this array. So if I save it and go to our application, we still get the number 10. And now later, if we want to update the state with the function that we get inside useState, we can just trigger set count and whatever is that we want to do. Really cool. So again, this is a convention. If you're working with counts, it's set and whatever is that you're working with. Or if you're working with cars, it's going to be set car. If you're working with dinosaurs, it's going to be set dinosaurs. All right. Okay. So now what we need to do, well, we need to, modify the state. That's, what we are here for. So I'm going to delete the console account. We know what we get there, so we don't need it anymore. So now what I'm going to do an onClick. So onClick equals open and close. So I'm going to create a function that, it's going to set the count. It's going to change the state. So it's going to be const, and I'm going to call it add1, right? Open and close, and this is going to be just a function, right? Just a function. So when we do this, of course, we're going to trigger the add1. So I'm going to put onClick add1. So what do we need to do? How can we change the state? So first, of course, this is a function, so we do set count. And inside, what we need to do is to pass what we want to modify. In this case, we want to grab whatever count we have right now and add it 1. So this could change the state and the application can re-render, right? That's what we do with state components, with class-based components. The same idea right here. So I'm going to do count, I'm going to do +1. I'm going to show you a better way in a second. So I'm going to reload it and we get the initial count of 10. If I add 1, it's working. Right, man. And of course, what's happening is that, of course, the application, React Now, knows that we have a functional component with a state, and every time we trigger the set count and we modify the state, it's going to re-render the return. It's going to re-render this component. We cannot just do console log because we don't have a render, but we have some other methods, methods we get with the React to know when the application is re-rendering. But don't worry, we're gonna get there. So of course, instead of just triggering the function, what you can do is to do this in line. You can open and close and, do set count +1, and that's still going to work, right? Reload it and add 1, that works. This works just like a state component, a class-based component. But of course, the way to do it is a little bit different. Now, if you go to the docs, right here, you get something else. We do get the set count, and you get something that's called previous count. So inside of the set count, you have access to an argument that is going to be called prev count, which is, the previous count. Let me just, do it, implement it right here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just trigger the add 1. I'm going to change it to that, and I'm going to do everything right here. So I'm going to delete this, right? And again, what you get is you get access to the previous count. So the previous count is going to be equal to the count. The only thing is that now we are managing this through set count and not directly with the count variable we have right here at the top. That's why they give us. This is going to be like the prev props and the previous state with the life cycles, pretty much the same idea. So when we do set count, we get access to the previous count, and this one will return, this is a function, it will return, whatever we want to do. In this case, previous count -1. All right, so if I reload the application, this still works. Oh, I'm doing minus. So kind of gave that away. So I'm gonna add 1, and of course we add 1. And of course this one works again just like the other way. What we could do with the set state. Pretty much the same idea. So of course we need to return something just like set state. So I'm gonna return, and I'm gonna add 1, and that still works. All right, so let's do the rest one. Let's do the other one. So I'm going to copy this one at the bottom. I'm going to paste it, and this one is going to be, rest 1, and the minus, and this one is going to be rest. All right, so of course, we just need to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy all of this. I'm going to go at the bottom and say, of course, rest 1. Let me fix it, rest 1, and it's going to be previous count -1. All right. So again, this should work. I'm gonna reload the application. I'm gonna add 1, we get it. I'm gonna rest 1, we still get it. All right. So if you go to the examples, it says right here, the example right here, it's doing pretty much everything with the initial count that it's coming from props. So again, they are just assuming that your function comes from a different component, and it's by default receiving the props or the count through props. So we're gonna just mimic the same example. I'm gonna go to the index, and I'm gonna go to the app, and I'm just gonna pass some props. All right, so I'm gonna go here and say initial and then count, and this one, it's equal to 0. All right, we're gonna start there. So now the app component, it's getting some counts, some initial prompts. It's going to open and close, and I'm going to say, initial count. Let me just copy the name so I can avoid typos. So now we do have an initial count, so I can pass it here, and it's going to start at 0. All right. So if I reload the application, we should be getting the same example. I'm going to add 1, that works. I'm going to rest 1, and that still works. Now, of course, you can pass the initial count to the set count if you wish. Doesn't matter. All right, man. So, everything works. So now what we need to do, some other things, other features that we get with useState. So let's go to the next one because I believe this one went a little bit long. So let's go to the next one and finish with useState. Okay, so let's keep going with useState. Now, what we need to do is the reset. So this one is going to be pretty simple. If you want to try it at home, you can try it. So I'm going to call it reset. So on this one, I'm going to just do it here. I'm going to open and close. And now I'm going to say that the count it's equal to 0. So I'm going to do set count, open and close, and 0. All right, so let me just fix this. There we go. It's going to go back. And of course, if I do reset, we get 0. In this case, I know that the initial count is 0. Maybe in your application, in real life, the initial count will not be 0, maybe something else, maybe 10 or 100 or true or false or whatever. So in this case, I'm doing hard coding the data. What we can do, just like we get on the example, is to make a reference to the initial count that we get from prompts. That one gets unchanged. So if I do rest 1, I'm going to reset and we still get it. So again, if you want to go back in one point of your component, you want to go back to the initial count or the initial whatever property you're using, you might need to store this on a different variable so you can know what is the initial state. Because once you start changing it, you don't have access to that. Right now we do because we are getting this on the prompts. All right. Okay, so I want to show you something else, and I'm pretty sure that you're saying, all right, so I can use an object just like we do on state, and instead of do count, I can use count and set state. We could do something like that because the useState can accept an object. And yeah, that's good thinking, but it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work the way you expect. It's gonna work in some cases, but not in most cases. So let me just force that scenario so I can show you the problem, so you can avoid using this just like that. So I'm gonna go right here, and instead of getting a count, I'm gonna say that we have a state. So I'm gonna do state just like this. I'm gonna go to set count, and this one is gonna be set state, of course, state. And the useState, in the initial count, we don't have that anymore. Now it's going to be an object, just like we would do with state. So I'm going to go and say that now we have a count, and the count it's equal to the initial count. All right? You're just trying to mimic a state. Now, of course, we will need to change the references. So if you have a set count, now we don't have it anymore. We're going to have a set state, and we're going to have a set state. And this one as well, set state. All right. So now it says count is not defined in this count because we don't have a count anymore. Now we have a state, right? So now if I do state, of course, that's not going to work because we are printing an object. So what we want to do is print whatever we have inside count. All right. So if I reload the application, of course, I'm going to try to trigger this and nothing happens because this logic right now, it's broken. The previous count, it's not a number. It's going to be an object. So we're going to need to change it from here. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go here and, of course, change it. Sorry, maybe not. I'm not going to do it here because I'm going to show you that this will not work. And then I'm going to just go back to the previous example and I'll have to do it again. I'm just going to leave it and do it from here because, it's the same idea. So I'm going to go to the onClick. Let me make some space. I'm going to go to the add one. All right. So I'm going to do the set state, right? So we get access to that. And now what we want to do is we want to set the new state of this object. That's the idea. So if I go to set useState, I'm going to open an object because this is what we need to return. And now inside, we're going to get the count property. And this one is going to be equal to state.count plus 1, right? So let me fix it. State.count plus 1. So if we check it, I'm going to reload it. I'm going to do add 1, and that works. All right. And, I'm going somewhere. Just, bear with me. I'm gonna copy this one, and on the rest one, I'm gonna pretty much do the same thing. Made a mistake there. So this one is gonna be -1. I'm not gonna do the reset. It's gonna reload it. We get add 1, and we get rest 1. All right. So if you want to use something like this with just one property, that's gonna work. You know, this kind of a will work. The problem is that you would use something like this because you want to mimic state. So, and this is because you want to add more properties. You want to manage more properties from the same place. So I'm going to use user. I'm going to add one more property. And this one is going to be user Francis. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to grab that user and I'm going to put it right here at the top. And maybe I'm going to change it to an H1 so we can see it, you know, bigger. So I'm going to go to state and user. All right. So now I'm going to reload the application, of course, and let me remove the count. All right. So of course, when the application loads, we have the initial state of Francis with the user and the initial state of count. All right. So now what we are doing, we are going to do add 1 or -1, and we are entering the count and adding 1 or rest 1. Look at what happens. You know, add 1. Okay, the count of 1 works. And if I do rest 1, you know, that works. But the Francis property just goes away. And this is what, you know, how this useState works. It's not aware of single properties or other properties in your state, just like, you know, a class-based component would do. The class-based component will read whatever you have right here. And if you're changing count, it's going to go to that property only and change that one. But a useState works in a different way. It will replace the whole object. Since right now you're saying that the set state is equal to this object, is going to grab whatever logic you got right here and it's going to swap it for, you know, the new state without the user Francis. That's why the Francis goes away. So again, if you're thinking of using the useState just like you would do with a class-based component, just doesn't work. You could do something creative, like do ... and state or something like that. You could do something like that. But again, it's not recommended. Let me just go to the docs and try to find the example. Let me just see. Maybe it's this one. I believe it's this one. Yeah. So unlike this set state method found in the class component, useState does not automatically merge update objects. So right here, they're just telling you don't do it. You can replicate this behavior by combining the function upper. So you can do ... previous state, whatever you have with the state, and then, you know, whatever you want to do now. And again, this one will work. But it says, it says that you shouldn't use it like that way. So you get another option to do what you want to do. What we want to do in this case is to use the useReducer. Right, so useReducer, that sounds like Redux. And yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's like a very light Redux version that comes from React, not from Redux. So we're going to talk about the useReducer much later because, again, the useReducer works just like Redux. And I wanted to save this section, the hooks with the useReducers, just for now, because now we know how to use Redux. So learning this one, just real simple because it's pretty much the same. Pretty much the same. All right. So if we go back to the project, and again, we cannot use this like this. I'm going to go back to the previous example. Told you I was going to go back. So I'm just going to just go back. All right, almost done. That function. And I'm sorry for this, but, you know, we kind of need to do it. So I'm going to go back on this one. We get not state, we get the count. All right. And we get the initial count and then set count and count. All right, cool. So let me check it. And, you know, works. All right. So now again, we cannot do that state logic. So what if you want to use more properties? You know, the other way we can add different properties and handle different things on the same instance. Well, with set count, if you're gonna work with something else that maybe it's not count, you will need to create a new useState for, you know, whatever it is that you're working. Let's say that you're working with posts. You want to show some posts right here. So what you need to do, you need to create a new one, a new instance of useState. If you're working with posts, you're going to do posts and then set posts. Yeah, I know, but it's the way it works. So I'm going to do useState Again, gonna open and close. Now, the good thing about this is that, of course, you can still manage arrays of data, because an array is just, you know, a single element. So you're just passing an array. Then what you can do, you can read whatever you have right here and modify the array in the way you want to. So let's say that you're gonna get, when the application loads, you have 1 post. But later the user is gonna, I don't know, click on something and you want to load 1 more post. Of course, we are not gonna go to a server right now and fetch more posts. But I'm gonna just give you an example. I'm gonna do name and then super awesome hooks, whatever. And I'm gonna add 1 more thing, maybe a body. I'm gonna do body, and then everything is awesome when you are part of a team. All right. I'm pretty sure you know you know that line. So okay, so what I want to do, I want to access the posts, and I want to create a map so I can show the posts at the bottom. So I'm gonna add a line right here, just like this. I'm gonna go at the bottom, and I'm just gonna, of course, loop this. So I'm gonna say, okay, so if we do have posts, just like this, we are accessing the posts right here. I'm gonna say that I want to map. I'm gonna do dot. I'm gonna do map, open and close, and I want to, of course, get an item and then return some JSX. So we're gonna get the item and we're gonna get the iteration, so we can pass it as key. So we're gonna use a div, open and close. All right, let me scroll down. So we do have a key, open and close, and this one is I. And inside, of course, we will get access to whatever content you have right here, just like you would do with state. So this one works the same way. So I'm gonna do div and get a name. Let me do it correctly. I'm gonna do a name, and this one, it's equal to item.name, and then we get, you know, pretty much same. So I'm just gonna copy, and I'm gonna say the body, it's equal to item.body. All right. Right, you know, just a simple map. I'm gonna save it, gonna reload it, and we get the name and we get the body. Right, that's cool. So now what I want to do, I want to maybe add a button, and whenever we click it, we're gonna add 1 more post, and then the application will re-render and re-render the new list of posts. All right. So of course, I'm gonna add 1 more button. I want to type it again, so I'm gonna do just this. All right. So this button is gonna be to add a post. So I'm gonna say add 1 more post. Right. So I'm gonna say add 1 and then post, and we're gonna handle this with a function, from a function. So I'm gonna say const add 1 post equal to, and we're gonna run some code. Now, of course, we are not fetching new posts from any place. So I'm just gonna copy this one, and I'm gonna put it on a variable right here. In real life, of course, this you can get something different, but right now, again, we are just practicing. So this one, it will be just an instance of a new post. So I'm gonna say 2 and then 2, so we can see the difference. All right. So now how can we, you know, click the button and get the new list of posts? So what we're gonna do right here is the same set posts we've been doing. Now I'm gonna do set posts, open and close. What do we want to do? Well, we want to set a new state for that array. So again, we use the array. If we're using an object, you will need to do object. So what is the array? Well, the array will get pretty much whatever we get inside posts. So dot 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 posts, and then a comma, and then I'm gonna be passing that new post that we have right here. So if we reload the application and I'm gonna go on 1 more post, we can get it. I made a mistake. Let me make it a little bit better. Because right now, with each, we are not doing it. I'm gonna put this one right here. All right. All right, that's a little bit better. All right. Of course, this one will add the same post the whole time. So again, if you want to loop arrays of data, now you can do it with the state. Before, you couldn't do it with a functional component. All right. So let's go to the next one. We're gonna talk about the other basic property, basic method we get, the other hook. It's going to be called useEffect. Okay, so now we're going to talk about another feature we get with hooks, which is useEffect. Now, if we go to the docs, right here we get the the information about useEffect. So again, hooks API, useEffect. You're going to get all the information about what this is, and it says accepts a function that contains imperative possible effectful code. Mutations, whatever, subscriptions, and then instead of useEffect, and then it says this, think of effect as an escape hatch from React's purely functional word into imperative world. What? Who writes this? The React documentation is the worst. It's the worst. So then it says right here, let me find it. So the function passed to useEffect will run after the render it's committed to the screen. So this actually makes sense. And it says by default, effects run after every completed render. So this is the only thing we needed. Everything else is just whatever. So what we get with useEffect, it's kind of a similar behavior to component.mount and component.update in few words. That's it. I just resumed all this nonsense in just a single line. So let me show you how to use it. It's pretty simple to use. So I'm gonna go at the top, and we need to bring it at the top. So it's useEffect. All right. So I'm gonna go at the bottom, and we will use this one just like again a component.mount or component.update. I'm gonna go at the bottom. And I'm gonna say I want to use that useEffect. Open and close. So this one, of course, it's a function that will do something. Right. What do we want to do? Well, in this case, I'm just gonna do console log. And I can console log, maybe useEffect. All right, so I'm gonna go to the application, I'm gonna reload the application, and we get, the useEffect. So what is happening is that, when it first runs on the application, it's gonna get triggered. So again, it works like a component.mount. Now, if I update state, I'm gonna add 1, we are triggering the useEffect again. So now it's working like a component.update. And, it's gonna get triggered every time we do an update. Now, if I reload the application and I kind of do a reset, and remember that the reset will go back to 0. It's going to change the state back to 0. So if I do reset, nothing happens. So again, this is kind of works like a pure component, right? So it's really cool. This is the most useful feature of all these hooks, in my opinion. Now you can do whatever you want right here. You can do console logs. You can maybe alert or do something with a different variable that you have on this component. Let's say that we have maybe a variable called hey that says hello or something like that. And then we want to, of course, use it from the useEffect. Of course, you get access to this. So let's say that we want to console log hey, so we get hello. You can, trigger maybe a different function. Let's say that I have a function called alert something, and this, let me just correct this, alert something. And this one is just gonna be a function that it will do, just an alert. So alert and then something. And then if we want to trigger, we can go at the bottom and trigger the function. So it renders and we get something. You can use it just like this. So it's a very cool feature. The most useful thing about the hooks. I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna delete this. We don't need it anymore. And what we can use, I'm gonna say just console log, and I'm just gonna of course show you an example, and you're gonna get it with the example. If I use useEffect and I just console log the count, and let me delete the functions so we can get rid of the warning. All right. So if I of course run it, the first time it renders, it's gonna get executed because it triggers after the renders. This is important to know. It will not trigger before. So if I do count, of course, this is triggering after, and we get 0. So if I add 1, it's gonna give us not the previous state, but the next state. It works like a component.update or a component.mount. All right, that's cool. Now, an additional feature we get with useEffect is that you can instruct, what you want to do. What you want to do right here. So if I do comma and the second argument is an array with the name of what we want to, control, and I'm gonna say count. This one will is gonna trigger only if we modify the state of count, not if we do the post. So if I do add 1 or rest 1 or reset, we are kind of getting, the useEffect. It's gonna get triggered with the useEffect. But if I add a post, this one will not trigger. Notice that we are not getting a console log. So this one will only listen for the changes on the count property, right? Really cool stuff. Another good thing is that maybe, let's pretend that you need to control something for the count and then you need to do something else for the posts. So you can use many useEffects, as much as you want. Let's say that in this one, we're gonna console log the post. So instead of this one, I'm gonna say post. All right. So I'm gonna reload the application, and of course we get the initial state of the account, so we get triggered, and the initial state of post, so we get triggered. So if I do add one, that's gonna trigger for the count. And if I do one more posts, we're gonna get trigger for posts. So really, really cool. Now another thing we can do with this is that maybe you want to run some code after the page, the component renders. You don't want to trigger this useEffect every time that you update, right? Okay, so in this case, you can use maybe another effect, and with this one you can pass an empty array. And this one you can say mounted. So now I'm gonna reload the page. Of course, we get it once, one for the count, one for the posts, and one for that one. All right. So I'm gonna update the count, and we are getting the the trigger for the count, and put the posts, and we get the posts. So with this one, we can achieve the same behavior we would get with a component that mount. It will run only once after the component was mounted, right? Really cool. You get different features with the the same hook. So another very cool feature we get with useEffect is the clean effect. Now this one, of course, it's a feature we get with useEffect, and notice how easy it was to use this. It was pretty simple, and on the docs it's really hard. So again, I would advise you to maybe just check the documentation when you want to learn or know something about React, but maybe use it, just search it on the web. Search the web for more information, because this one was pretty confusing, and this one it's really simple to use in real life. So you get something with this that calls clean effect. And right here, you get it on the docs, but again, I'm not going to use the docs. I'm going to show you a practical example, and you're going to get it this way, because if you go through the docs, it's unreadable. So what I wanted to do, I'm going to create a new functional component just to render the post. So every time we render a post, right here, for example, we rendered the first one, we make a reference to a different file where we are going to create a different component, and every time we render a new post, is going to be, the mounting of a new component. So, right? Okay, so first we're going to do that, and then I'm going to tell you how to use the clean effect. So I'm going to go to source, and I'm going to create a new file called posts.js or post.js, because it's just for a single post. So of course we need to import React from React, right? We still need to do that. And I'm going to go at the top, and we're going to use that effect. So I'm gonna just bring it. All right, use effect. All right, so this one is gonna be just a functional component. I'm gonna call it post with a capital P, and we're gonna return, of course, just a function that returns some JSX. Now I'm gonna return, open and close, and I'm gonna return, some JSX. And what I'm gonna be returning is the same thing we are returning from here. So I'm just gonna copy all. Going to go to post and paste it, and make it a little bit better. Now later we're going to make a reference to the post, and we're going to pass the item as a prop, so we're going to receive it on the post. So I'm going to bring the item. All right, first we're going to make it work, then we're going to check the clean effect. So right now, of course, we don't need this, right? We don't need it. We just need the access to the item, whatever we want to render right here. So then of course we need to export, and then default, and of course is post. All right, so now if we include this post and we try to render this, we're going to be rendering a single, mounting this component each time we want to render a post. So let me just go to app, and let's do all the logic for this. I'm going to need to go at the top, and of course we need to import. I'm going to be called it posts from that / and then post. And now if we want to render that post, we just make a reference to post. So I'm gonna go here, delete this, we don't need it anymore. I'm gonna say that I want to render that component, and I'm gonna be passing the item as a prop. So open and close, let's say item, and then we're gonna have a key so we can get rid of the warning. So it's the iteration. So let me fix it. All right, so very cool. So of course we get index that's not contained. All right, that's my mistake. It's not index, it's posts from right here, posts. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna reload the application, and we are getting the post. Now the thing is, of course, now it's a little bit different. Previously we were grabbing whatever we had on the state of post, and creating a map. So everything happens on this component. Now every time we are rendering a post, this one, it's a different component. So, we are mounting a specific component, its own component. So if I add one more post, this is gonna render, is gonna loop, and it will render one post, then the second post, then the third one, then the fourth one. So these ones are, different components. All right. Now, since they are different components, we get access to the useEffect, of course, on each component. So I'm going to go at the top and use the effect. So useEffect, open and close. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go open and close and do the mounting. I'm going to use this as a component mount. So I'm going to say console log and then post mounted or / created, doesn't matter. All right. It's going to reload the application and we get first the post mounted or this one. Let me go back and comment this out. All right. So we reload the application, we get one post. So of course we are including one component. So post mounted or created. If I do one more, you're going to get it again because we are mounting a different component. Another one, and we get it every time we mount a new component. Now with a clear effect, what you get is a way of, going back to the post, it's a way you get to get trigger whenever the component gets unmounted. That's the whole idea. First, I need a way to delete the posts we have right here. So I'm gonna go and add one more button at the bottom. So I'm gonna copy this, and don't worry, I know it's a little bit confusing, but you're gonna get it. So you're gonna see the example and you can say, okay, I know. So I'm gonna say remove posts, remove and then posts. So when we click this one, we want to trigger a function that it's gonna be returning, deleting all the posts, right? Pretty simple. So I'm gonna go here at the top and let me make this to const, all right. So the only thing we want to do here is to grab whatever we have on posts and leave an empty array. So we're gonna be deleting all the posts. So the only thing I need to do set posts, open and close, and just clear all the posts. All right. So I'm gonna reload the application. I'm gonna add posts, and if I remove the posts, of course, okay, it is working. We are just removing all the posts. Now I'm gonna comment this out because they are in the way. And all right. Okay. So notice that I'm removing all the posts. We get 3 instances of this mounted property. So what I want to do now is that when we clear all the posts, I want to get something right here that's saying that particular component was unmounted. So this is what why we would use the clear effect. How does the clear effect works? Well, the clear effect is a function that gets returned at the very end of this use effect. So I'm gonna go here and just return a function. Now this function is gonna say console log, open and close, and it will be component and then exit. And I'm gonna go to app and I'm gonna delete the use effect because I'm getting a warning. I don't want that. So I'm gonna reload the application and we get the first post was mounted. If I add one more, we get a 2. If I add one more, we get a 3. Now, if we remove the posts, this function right here is going to get triggered. This use effect is listening for the component will unmount. So if this gets unmount, we're going to trigger that. So I'm going to remove the posts and we get 1 for each component that was unmounted. So again, by using a clear effect, you get a way to use a component will unmount. And that's very, very cool. With the same thing, we get pretty much access to component did update, component did mount, and component will unmount. So one more thing I need to tell you about this clear effect is that if you're using it to listen for a particular thing that will run every time, this function will run every time. So let me just show you. I'm gonna go back to the previous example. I'm gonna bring the use effect, and I'm gonna go to the use effect of the account. I'm gonna comment the console log, so I can skip that one. I'm gonna go at the bottom and I'm gonna pretty much do the same thing. I'm gonna do a return, open and close, and we're gonna return maybe just a console log. So console log, and this one use effect and then count. All right, So I'm gonna reload the application, and if I click on this one, we want to get useEffect count. And we are getting and we are triggering this. And this is because we are listening for something that gets updated. The other one works because we are just listening for the component, did mount. That's it. So if you're gonna use this one as it is, this function, this clear effect, it will trigger every time you do an update. So, maybe not the best way to use it. All right. So I would use a clear effect only if I want to listen for a component will unmount. All right. So, again, this one is the useEffect. Was really simple to learn. The documentation was nonsense. So again, you shouldn't use the documentation. So on the next one, we're gonna talk about a different thing. Let me just go to Hooks API. So we have something that calls useReducer. Right. So this one works just like Redux. So we're gonna create kind of an example that it's very similar to Redux, and we're gonna use the reducer. And if we go to the useReducer documentation, you can see that it's pretty much Redux. The state action, we get this switch, and then we dispatch, we get a dispatch. So again, it just works just like Redux. We're gonna use an example so you can see it work. You see it working. But again, if you know Redux, you're gonna get it in just a second. Okay, so now that you know Redux, because of course we talked about Redux previously, I know that you know it. So when I talk about this, when we start talking about reducers and everything else, I'm pretty sure that you know what I'm talking about. And if we even get it on the documentation, it says if you're familiar with Redux, you already know how this works. And this is the only awkward thing that the documentation is saying, the only simple thing. And this is right. If you know how to use Redux, you know how to use this one. So first, what I need to do, I'm not going to use this example because it's already a little bit crowded. I'm going to create a new component. So I'm going to call it useReducer because this project, reducer.js, this project is going to go to you. So you know that whenever you go to use Reducer, you're going to get the example right here. So what I want to do, I want to achieve the same example of the add one, rest one, and reset, but with the reducer. So I'm going to open, I'm going to copy, sorry. I'm going to paste it right here. And of course, we don't need all of this nonsense right now because we're going to use a different thing. So I'm going to delete all of this. I'm going to go right here and delete all of this. We are not going to use it. And I'm just going to leave the bare bone example. So count is going to be equal to 0. Then the onClicks are gone. Again, this one is gone and this one is gone. And this one is gone as well. Now the name of the component is going to be a little bit different. So useReducer. And actually, let's call it reducer component, whatever. So reducer component and reducer component. So now, of course, if we reload the application, we are still rendering the app from the index.js. So what I need to do is to bring the reducer comp, and it's going to be from the useReducer. All right. So now I'm still going to make a reference to a reducer component, and I'm still passing the initial count. So if you go to the example, at least we get the component at least. All right. So how does it work? How useReducer works? Well, just like the other hooks, we need to bring it at the top. So I'm going to go and say use and then reducer. All right. Let me make it a little bit better. All right. So as you might know, for when you work with Redux, in order to make it work, you need a valid reducer. And that reducer, it's a function, right? That takes a state and action and returns a switch so we can match the types. So on this one just works the same, works pretty much the same. All right, so let's create that function. I'm gonna go at the top and I'm gonna say that I need a function called reducer. Now this reducer, of course, is just a function. Inside, we're gonna get a switch, right? And what are we gonna be doing? Well, first with the reducer, we need an initial state, and then we need access to the action so we can know the type and the payload. Again, same idea. So on this one, we will listen for the action, the type. So every time we match a type, something is gonna run. Now in this case, we don't have any types. We're gonna create it in a couple minutes. So the only thing we're gonna do is just to do a default. So default. And the default case, you get it right here on the example. So it's throw new error. So I'm just gonna copy and paste it. All right. So now we do have a valid reducer. Now what we need to do is we need to do everything else. how can we go from this component to the reducer to trigger, to dispatch an action, of course, and do something on the reducer? Well, this one works just like using the useState. First, we need to create a variable with an array to use some destructuring, and this one is going to be equal to useReducer. All right, this method. So now what are we going to get on the array? Well, first we get the state of whatever we are doing, and then we get the dispatch. You know, when we access dispatch, we're going to dispatch an action to go through the reducers, and then, you know, coming back to the state. Right. So this one, again, just right now, it just looks like the useState, but it's a little bit different. Now this useReducer needs something right here in order to work. First, it needs to know where it's going to go when we dispatch an action. Well, that one is going to be the reducer. So since we have it in the same file, I'm going to make a reference to the reducer. That is the first one. Now the application, of course, is going to render. We get warnings, but so far no mistakes. So when the application renders, it's going to go and create an instance of useReducer. And if you remember, with Redux, you need an initial state. So on the useReducer, you need to pass the initial state of the application. Now we kind of have it right here. We get the initial count, but this one, if you remember, is just a number. It's just a number. It's not an object. And what I want to do on this one, it's, you know, use kind of an object notation. So I'm going to go at the top, and I'm just going to create a variable called initial state, and this one is going to be equal to the object version of what we have. So it's going to be just an object with a count property, which is equal to initial count, because when the application starts, the initial count is going to be 0. So we can store this on an object. So now the useReducer needs the reducer, and it needs the initial state. So since we have it right now in the variable, I'm going to make a reference to initial state. All right, and that's it. Okay, so how can we know this one is working? So I can go right here at the bottom, and I can console log and then state. And I'm making a reference to this state. So if I go to the application, we're gonna get that initial state, which is equal to count 0. So what it's doing, it's grabbing the initial state and it's putting it inside here. All right. So cool. So now what we can do, we have access to the initial state. So I can delete this, go right here to the return, and pretty much do what we need to do. I can make a reference to state.count. All right, and we get 0. All right. So now what I want to do, I want to dispatch an action when we add 1. So we can go to the reducer, update the state, and then come back, of course, with the state updated and reflect the changes on this one, right? That's the whole idea of doing this. So this one works just, again, like Redux. When we do an onClick, so I'm going to do onClick, this one is going to be equal to something. What are we going to do? We're going to run a function. With what? Well, we're going to run this dispatch. So on this one, we get all the logic for dispatching an action. So what do we need to pass on the dispatch? Well, just the same with we get with Redux. We need to dispatch a type and a payload. In this case, we are not going to use payload. I'm just going to pass a type. So I'm going to do increment because we want to add 1. So now the dispatch, since we get our reducer connected, is going to go to the reducer with the type, and we're going to check the type. And if we find a case of increment, let me copy the name. All right, increment. I'm going to paste it right here. We're going to, of course, enter here and do something. What do we want to do? Just like Redux, we want to return something. What do we want to return? Well, we are using an object right here, object notation. So I'm going to return that object with the count, which is going to be equal to state.count plus 1. Remember that when we initialize the instance, we are passing the initial state. So now the reducer knows what is the initial state or the previous state. All right. So we can safely do state count plus 1, and this, it's going to work. All right. Let's check it. Let's see if it works. I'm going to reload the application. I'm going to add 1, and it works, man. Really, really cool. Much simpler than Redux because we don't have to do all the connections and everything else. But don't worry. Okay, let's do the other ones. The REST one. I'm gonna go here and do the onClick. So let me go here and do the onClick. This one is going to be equal to, pretty much the same thing. We just need to dispatch and go to the decrement part of the application. So I'm going to go open and close, and we dispatch, right? What are we going to be dispatching? Well, we're going to dispatch the same type with the decrement, right? So now let me make this a little bit better for you, all right? So I'm going to go at the top, and if we get a case of decrement, I'm going to go and return pretty much the same thing, but with a minus, right? All right, minus. And if we test it, it should be working. Add 1, cool. Rest 1, it works. So really, really cool stuff. Really cool stuff. React is just getting better and better. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the project, and what I want to do the reset. Now before that, I'm going to tell you that you can do something like this. There's no need to create an instance of this. You can directly do it here. And that one still works. All right, so I want to do the reset. And if you remember, we kind of need the initial value of the count. So we get it right here as props. The thing is that right now we are just dispatching an action with the type. So the type is going to do something right here, but all the logic, it's happening right here. We get accessing the state, and we are doing minus or plus. Now what happens if we need to pass a value from the dispatch to the reducer? All right, so pretty simple stuff. I'm going to do an onClick, and if you know Redux, again, you know how to do it. Don't worry, if you don't get it, I'm going to enlighten you. So of course, we still need to dispatch something. Now, what are we going to be dispatching? Well, again, we do need a type. So I'm going to say type, and I'll open and close. And this type is going to be equal to, I don't know, clear. Now I'm going to do comma, and I need to pass a different property. This property will contain the value of what we need to change it. So we need to change it back to initial count. So again, with Redux, we get payload. So with this one, it's just the same idea. It's payload. You can change this to whatever you want. Doesn't matter. Payload is just a property. Doesn't matter the name. So what are we going to do? Well, payload, it's going to be equal to initial count. So when we go back to the reducers, of course, now we're going to listen for the case of clear. I believe was clear. Yeah. And of course, we're going to return something, which is the count column, and equals to the state that action that payload. Right. So if I reload the application, I'm gonna change this, and I reset, we are resetting back to 0, which is equal to the payload, which is equal to the initial count. So good, man. And again, all of this works just like Redux. It's pretty much the same idea. Now, if you ask me, in conclusion, we kind of get a portable Redux for functional components. And if you ask me, should we switch Redux for this one? Well, no, not really. So Redux is still Redux. But, with this one, you get a useful way, a small trim component or way to add Redux without bringing all the Redux library, and doing all the connection on the index. Again, if you need something simple to manage a state, you can use this one, and it's really cool. It's going to work really great. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so now we get one more hook, which is going to be the useContext. The thing is that to show you this one, I will need to explain about context. Context is something different. It's not a hook, right? It's something else. We never reached this subject because I was saving it for right now. Because now that we know how React works, now that we know how Redux works, and how this useReducer works, we can know and understand how context use in React. So context is not something new. It's been here for I believe from 16.5 or the 3 or something like that. It was available previously on beta, was not really actually for production, but it seems like now it's pretty stable, so we should be able to use it. So first, I need to explain you about context. If you want to know about this a little bit more using the guides, you can go to advanced guides, and right here you get context. But don't worry, I'm going to give you an example because it's really confusing much more confusing coming from the docs. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go and create an example for this. So first, it's going to make no sense. It's going to make no sense at all, but then you're going to get it because it's pretty simple. So I'm going to create a new directory and I'm going to call this one context. That's it. I'm going to call it context. Doesn't matter. Now inside, I'm going to get 3 different components. One is going to be the main app that we're going to show from index. Then we're going to have a profile component, and then we're going to have a cart component. So we have 3 different components. All right. So I'm going to go to context and I'm going to start creating the files. I'm going to call this context, and I'm using a capital because I'm going to use the plugin to create the class. So this one is going to be context, and I'm going to call it app, just like that. And of course, we're going to need to pretend that this is the main entry of our application. All right, then I'm going to do another one. It's going to be context, just like that. And this one is going to be profile.js. And I'm going to make a new one, all with context, of course, context. And this one is going to be called card. Now, you don't need to, in real life, you don't need to put context. I'm putting context because this project is going to go to you, so you can know that all the context section is right here on this part of the file. All right? Okay. So I'm going to go to app, and on this one, what we need to do, we need to create a class-based component. So React class-based component. Now, if you don't know what I'm using a plugin to generate snippets. Is this one, ES6, ES7 React snippets. So you can download and use it. So okay, I'm gonna remove this one, and I'm gonna go right here at the bottom and export default context app. I'm gonna make this one saying hello. That's it. And now I'm gonna go back to my project, and I'm gonna go back to the index, and I'm gonna include this one from the index. So I'm gonna comment this out, and I'm going to import, and I believe I'm gonna call it context. Let me double check. I'm gonna call it app because it's context app, right? So import from. Let me change it from that / it's context and then context app. So now this is the main entry of our application. I'm going to delete the initial count. And if we go to the browser, we can see hello. Okay, that's good. You know, we're not doing anything special. This is pretty simple. So I'm going to delete the other ones. I'm going to just close them, not delete them. I'm going to close them. And now this is the main entry of our application. Okay, so right here, we're going to make a reference to the context profile. And this one is going to be just a React stateless component, not stateless, functional now. Sorry, it's kind of hard to make the change. So I'm going to go and do React. I believe it's the class no, it's functional component. All right. Okay, so I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to go at the bottom. I'm going to say export default context profile. And this one, it's going to say just profile. All right. So now from this one, I'm going to import that. I'm going to say import, and I'm going to be calling this context profile. Doesn't matter. And this one is going to be equal to / then context profile, import from, of course. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here, and now we're going to make a reference to this component. So now, of course, the context app, it's rendering whatever we get in context profile, which, you know, we get profile. Good. Again, what we are doing, it's pretty dumb. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to go here and do React class a functional component. I'm going to press tab, and we do pretty much the same thing. I'm pretty sure you're a little bit confused because what I'm doing, it's pretty dumb. So yeah, it is dumb. So on this one, we're going to say cart. That's it. And now, same idea. I'm going to go here and say import. I'm going to copy the context card name, and it's going to be from / context card, and that's it. We should be getting a card on the screen. So sorry, let me just save it and do the reference. So I'm gonna open. All right. So now we're gonna get the card. All right. So what we are doing is that whenever the application starts, we are going to the app. Now the app, it's making a reference to the context profile. Now the context profile, it's rendering the card. All right. So 3 components, you know, pretty much a single screen. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a state because, you know, the app starts and we have the state, we have the information of the user on the state. So I'm going to say state, and I'm going to add a username just like this. And I'm going to say that this one is Francis. Then the user has a last name. The last name of this one is Jones, of course. And this dude has an age. So it's going to be, I don't know, 20, whatever. All right, so now what I want to do, I want to pass this information to the next component, which is profile. And this from profile, I'm gonna be doing the context card. I'm gonna be sending this to context card, and I'm gonna change this like this because I like it a little bit better. Just to use a fat arrow function, I like it much better. So const is gonna be equal, almost done. All right. So how can we pass the data? Well, pretty simple. We just need to pass props. So just to make it a little bit more visual, I'm gonna add an h1 saying welcome to my app, and I'm gonna be passing the props. So let me make this better. This one is gonna be profile. All right, it's gonna open and close. What do we need to pass? Well, that's state. All right, so now we're gonna go to the context profile, and we pretty much need to do the same thing. We just need to bring the data. So now we are receiving props. All right, so on this one, I'm gonna go and say that we do have a profile, and then at the bottom, I'm gonna say HR just to make a line, and I'm gonna be passing the props to the card. So I'm gonna say profile equals open and close props dot profile. All right, so we get profile, and now we get the card. So now the card again is just getting the props. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just grab those props, and I'm gonna output the information we want, which is the user profile. So let me make this a little bit better. I'm gonna go here, gonna format selection. All right. So now in this one, I'm just gonna do something very dumb. I'm gonna do name, open and close, and now what we want to get here is the props dot profile dot username. Right. And for the other ones, same idea. This one is gonna be the last name, and the last name is gonna be last name. And again, if you're scratching your head saying, what are we doing? It's gonna make sense in a minute. Be patient. All right. So now, of course, we are getting the name of Francis, last name of Jones, and an age. All right. So what we are doing, again, we are just starting the app here. This one has some data. So what we need to do is we need to render this data on a different component. So the only default way we get with React is by passing everything as props. We pass the props to the next component. The next component send it to the next component. And, that's the way it works. Now, right now we have a pretty simple example, but in real life, maybe you can have a section or a component that has many children, many components. So maybe you're gonna have 8 or 7. So every time you need to pass some data from the initial component, you're gonna, have a lot of things going on, and you're gonna be passing props the whole time. And this is, in the long run, if you're doing this a lot, it's gonna be hard to maintain. It's gonna take you some time. So again, it's not a good behavior. Now then Redux came along, and we could use Redux to have a kind of a centralized store to share data with non-related components. We can bring Redux here, get the data, put it on the store, and then on this one we can bring Redux and get the same data without making a connection with the other components, right? We know that that's how Redux works. Now, in addition, what we get right now from React 16.5, we get something called context, which is a kind of a different way of passing data from one place to another place without making this connection, without passing the props. We can create kind of a centralized store, which is the context, where we can consume data from that pool and, show it right here. All right, so let's create the context. All right, so let's bring the context logic. So what we need first to use context, let me see if I can find it on the doc. We need something that calls create context. It's going to be something like this. You could create it on the same place. I'm going to create a different file for this. And again, it's just convention. So what we need to do in this case, I'm going to need to create a new file. And this one is going to be called context.js, just like this, context.js. And this is going to be the main pool of where we're going to be putting everything. So if we just compare this with Redux, this is going to be like the create store place. So first we need to import React because the context comes from React. So import React from React. All right. So I'm going to be creating a variable called my context. So context, and this is equal to React dot, and we get the create context. And again, it's just a method. It's like the create store from Redux. So then, of course, we need to use this pool because it's going to pool. We're going to toss things inside of here, and this one will be shared to other sections. We need to make this available so other components can, grab it. So, of course, export default and then my context. All right, so I'm going to copy and paste. All right, so this is done. I'm going to close this. We are not going to need it anymore. Now, you could use the app again, but I want to leave the app very clean. So I'm going to create a new component. And this is where all the magic is going to happen. So I'm going to call it, and again, by convention, so sorry, not convention, context, I'm going to call it context. By convention, this calls provider. And again, another reference to Redux. So let me fix it. This is the provider. All right. So the context provider is like an HOC. It's like a high order component. All the other components are going to be wrapped by this context provider. So this one is the one that has kind of a direct connection to this pool, to the, not to this one, to this pool. Okay, so first let's do the context provider. So this one needs to be a class, so React class base component, right? Gonna do the common export default at the bottom, export default, context provider, just like this. And again, you could do all this logic on the main app, but I don't want to do that. Okay, so the context provider, what it's gonna do is gonna pretty much handle all the store or the properties that we're gonna be storing and sharing through other components, right? It's just an HOC. Okay, so I'm gonna go here, and first, what I want to do, well, I want to share a state with a profile. So we have it right here. I'm gonna comment, I'm gonna copy, I'm gonna go here and say that now we have a new state. Now the state, since we could have many types of properties right here, I'm gonna put it inside of a property called profile. So later when we make a reference to this, we can say, for example, state.profile.endUsername. All right, so I'm gonna just put a state with something that says profile. All right, so now what do we need to do? Well, instead of just rendering a div or a fragment or anything, what we need to do, we need to render or return the my context. So I'm gonna go at the top, and again, I know that right now it makes no sense, but it's gonna make sense in a minute. You're gonna see it working, and you're gonna say, okay. So it's not / context. So instead of returning just a dumb JSX, I'm gonna be returning the my context component. So the my context component pretty much has all the information we're gonna need. So I'm gonna open and close. Now the my context, what it needs to be using, it's something that calls provider. So I'm gonna fix this, provider. Now the provider needs to return whatever other components we want to, of course, use. In this case, the app or the profile or whatever component. So in this case, inside of this, we do this .props.children. So just like I told before, it's just like an HOC. So now this provider will have all the get all the information we want to share with different components. In this case, the state. Of course, this one we don't need it anymore. I'm gonna go here, and now how can we tell the provider which data we are using? Right now we get it's just a state, but what we need to do is to tell the provider the data that we're gonna be passing. So we do this one on the property value. So value, it's equal to an object that we need to pass an object. So what do we need to pass here? Well, I'm going to be passing a property called profile. And now the profile, it's going to be equal to whatever we get on this .state.profile. So this .state.profile. Right. So later we're going to make from other components a reference to this component and access to the profile, and we're going to get all the data that we have right here. So you're going to see it in action. Don't worry. Okay, so now what do we need to do? I'm going to go to the context.app. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete any reference to, to this element. So I'm going to delete this, just like this. Now I'm going to bring right here at the top, this component, the component provider, because this is the main, the main component. This is the one that's sharing all this information. So from the main the JavaScript file, we need to wrap pretty much whatever we are doing with this component. So I'm going to bring it at the top. I'm going to call it import, then context, and then provider. All right, it's going to be from // context provider. Now, just like we are doing here, since we are rendering the children, we're gonna grab this one to wrap pretty much our whole application. So in this one, we just rendering the context provider that provides all the data we need, and we're gonna inject them right here. All right. So now on the context profile, we are passing props. Well, not anymore. Now we are using context. We don't really need it. Now what we need to do is to catch the information from the context card. That's the whole point. So I'm gonna go at the top, and first to bring the data, we need to import the my context right here at the top. It is gonna be from that / and then we get from let me find it first, and it's gonna be context / and then we need to bring the context. It's a little bit redundant, but that's okay. So now how can we use this to get the data? Now notice that I'm making a reference to the my context, which is context. It's not the provider and it's not the app. I'm making a reference to the the whole pool, because all of these components are already connected to the context. So on this one, we are making a connection to the main centralized store so we can consume the data. All right, so I'm naming this my context. You can just call it whatever you want. In this case, we are getting my context, of course. Okay, so I'm gonna go here at the bottom, and it's gonna look a little bit weird. So first I'm gonna comment this out, and I'm gonna go into it right here. So what we need to do, what we need to return, it's the my context dot, and then we bring the consumer, and then we wrap whatever we want to bring from that centralized store, whatever we get in my context, but we need to use consumer. I know it's a little bit weird, but that's the way it works. So this inside here, what we need to do, we need to return a function. So this function has access to the context, and the context is going to return something. So let's say that you want to make a access just the username. Well, now that you're doing right here, you can return just one text, one string, one value. So I'm going to make a reference to that context. Let me fix it. Make a reference to that context. We know that we have a profile, and then we know that we have a username. So if I do something like this and go back to our application, I'm getting Francis. So all right, it works. So again, it's a little bit weird. I believe that's why it's not very popular. But you can get a way to access kind of a centralized store if you have many components and you're passing props the whole time. So this is a much better way to do things if you get to that scenario where you get a lot of props. But again, there is a lot of typing, a lot of doing. So if you want to use Redux, I much prefer Redux for doing something like this. But if it's a very small application, using Redux makes no sense. This is the best way to do it. So now what I want to do, I want to pretty much do the same thing here. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to delete this. And what we do, we need to return some JSX. So open and close. And I'm going to use fragments, open and close again, because we need to return a single element. And I'm going to go here and say that I want to return this. All right, let me fix it. Let me make it a little bit better. And what we need to return, instead of props, now we got it inside context. We don't have props anymore. So if I save this, we get the same thing. Now, of course, you cannot just pass values. In this case, we are just passing, just a value. But you can pass functions, you can modify the state, and that state will be reflected on all the children that are using that same context. Let me just show you, it's pretty cool. So I'm gonna go to the actual provider. This one is the one that withholds all the information. So on this one, instead of just getting a profile, I'm just gonna write a function that calls hey, and whenever we trigger, we're gonna get an alert. Really simple. So alert, and I'm gonna do hey. All right. So now I can make a reference to this function, and it's gonna work, right? So I'm gonna go to the cart, and I'm gonna add a button. So button, open and close, and this one is gonna say alert, and I'm gonna say that whenever we go on click, so we're gonna trigger a function. So open and close, and we need to access the context dot, and the name of the function is hey. All right, so I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna alert, and we get it. So let's say that whenever I click a button, I want to modify the age. Of course, we can do this. It's just a function. And notice that right here on the actual provider, we get state. So what we can do is just trigger a function that will change the state, and whenever this application reloads and re-renders, all the information that we have right here will be consumed by the children's, and we're gonna see we're gonna get the changes. So let me just create a function. I'm gonna show you a simple one. I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say inc age. So inc age, again, it's just gonna be a function that's gonna do something. Whenever we trigger, what we want to do, well, we want to modify the state. So I'm gonna do this set state, open and close. What do we want to do? Well, I want to modify the age of the profile. Well, so again, we are using state, but we're gonna get an object within an object. So we need to do this a little bit different. So I need to do profile, open and close. I'm gonna go to profile, and first I'm gonna put whatever we get first from this, that state, that profile. And then of course I'm gonna access age. I'm gonna do this, that state, that profile. Of course, I'm gonna access age, and I'm gonna do +1. So now what we can do, we can just trigger the function from here, and we're gonna get the changes happening here. So I'm gonna copy this one. I don't want to type everything again. So this one is gonna be add age, and I believe I called it inc age. All right, I'm gonna trigger inc age, and if I add age, we can see it happening. So it works really, really good. Now, what is the point of doing, all of this? Again, if you're getting, if you have a component that has many props, is passing a lot of props and children's, that's good. And now, why are we doing this right now on the hooks section? Well, if we go again to hooks, we get a useContex. So if you go to the documentation, again, it's just really weird. It's pretty weird. You're not gonna get it if you just give it a light reading. So the useContex, the only thing that it does, it makes our life easier when we do the consumer. That's it. Pretty much, I'm gonna grab all this, just gonna comment this out, and I'm gonna put it right here. So now at the top, I'm gonna bring the useContex. And you're gonna see that this one is just so simple, but so useful if you're using the context. So first, what we need to do, we need to use the context. So I'm gonna create a variable that calls context, and this one is gonna be equal to useContex, open and close. Now the useContex, what it needs, it's a direct reference to the actual context. That's it. So now inside our application, we can use the keyword context, this name of the variable, instead of doing my consumer and everything else, returning the function. We can just do something like this. Let me just copy and paste. So I'm gonna copy paste the same example, and let me make it a little bit better. All right. So now the context is a direct reference to this variable that is gonna be pretty much doing all the work of my context consumer for us. So if we go to the application, we get the same deal. So if I alert, we still trigger the function. If I do plus, we are just modifying the state. So this is the only thing that useContex is. It's a very, useful hook if you're using context, and you can avoid, doing all of this crap. And that's it, Again, I needed to explain everything that happens with context before I can show you useContex. And I'm not sure this is something that you're going to use in real life. Maybe you like to do big projects, so I would recommend to use Redux instead of using context. But again, if you're doing something simple, use context. It's pretty cool. All right, so this is the last thing we're going to do for